August 15, 1945. 1,147 hours. Yokohama Harbor, Japan. The war had ended 6 days ago, but Private First Class Robert Hartley of the 11th Airborne Division carried something in his duffel bag that would prove more powerful than any weapon he'd wielded during 3 years of combat. 32 Hershey Bars, purchased with his own money at the PX in Okinawa, wrapped carefully in waxed paper to survive the Pacific crossing. What happened when he distributed those chocolate bars to a group of terrified children hiding in the rubble of Yamashita District would set in motion a transformation that military planners had never anticipated. The Japanese called it Aim no Kaseki, the miracle of sweets. The Americans would come to understand it as the beginning of reconciliation. The transformation of enemy into occupied territory required more than military victory. It demanded a psychological revolution that no strategic bombing campaign could achieve. What followed in the autumn of 1945 was not just an occupation but an unexpected collision of cultures where simple acts of kindness would accomplish what months of propaganda had failed to deliver. The Japanese civilian population in August 1945 existed in a state of absolute terror. Ministry of War broadcasts throughout July and early August had prepared citizens for American invasion with explicit warnings documented in captured propaganda materials. According to translation services operated by the Civil Intelligence Section, official government broadcasts had told civilians that American soldiers would murder men, assault women, and enslave children. In Tokyo Shinjuku Ward, municipal records show that 847 families had relocated to mountain villages specifically to avoid American occupation forces. In Osaka, police reports documented that 1,200 women had their heads shaved and dressed as men to avoid detection. The psychological preparation for occupation had created a population convinced that death was preferable to American rule. Lieutenant Colonel Theodore Wainwright, serving with the 8th Army's Civil Affairs Division, documented the initial occupation encounters in reports filed with General Douglas MacArthur's headquarters. His observations from August 28 through September 15, 1945, provide detailed accounts of civilian-military interactions during the crucial first weeks. Wainwright's report from September 3 noted that in Kanagawa Prefecture, entire villages had been abandoned before American forces arrived. Personal belongings, food supplies, and household goods remained untouched. Families had fled with only what they could carry, expecting total destruction of their communities. The standing orders from Supreme Commander Allied Powers Headquarters were explicit and had been distributed to all occupation units on August 20, 1945. General Order No. 12 specified fraternization policies, conduct toward civilians, and prohibited actions. Section 4 addressed treatment of children with unusual specificity for a military directive. The order stated that personnel were authorized to provide food items to Japanese children from personal rations, that no threatening gestures or aggressive actions toward children would be tolerated, and that all interactions with civilians would be conducted with dignity and respect. This final provision represented a dramatic departure from standard occupation doctrine as practiced in Germany. The reasoning behind these orders emerged from studies conducted by the Office of War Information throughout 1944 and early 1945. Psychological warfare analysts had concluded that Japanese civilian cooperation would be essential for effective occupation. Military government specialists calculated that hostile civilian populations would require massive garrison forces. Cooperative populations would enable rapid demobilization. But the architects of occupation policy had not anticipated the weapon that would prove most effective in transforming Japanese attitudes. It wasn't policy directives or propaganda broadcasts. It was something far simpler that American soldiers carried in their pockets, issued as part of standard field rations since 1943. The D-Ration chocolate bar, developed by Hershey Chocolate Company under contract to the U.S. Army Quartermaster Corps, would become an unexpected instrument of reconciliation. September 8, 1945. 0830 hours. Yokosuka Naval Base Perimeter. Sergeant William Patterson of the 1st Cavalry Division's Military Police Detachment encountered the first test of fraternization policy under circumstances that would be replicated thousands of times across occupied Japan in the coming weeks. A group of 7 Japanese children, ages estimated between 4 and 9 years old, had been observed near the base perimeter fence for 3 consecutive mornings. Military police reports documented their presence but noted they maintained distance and showed extreme fear responses when approached. Patterson's report, filed with the Provost Marshal's office, described children who appeared malnourished and wore clothing that was little more than rags. The decision Patterson made that morning violated no direct orders, but it challenged every assumption about enemy populations that 3 years of combat had reinforced. He approached the fence slowly, hands visible and empty, speaking in a calm voice though the children understood no English. From his field jacket pocket, he withdrew 4 Tootsie Rolls, standard issue in combat rations, and placed them carefully on the ground before stepping back. What happened next was documented in Patterson's report with unusual detail for a routine MP log entry. The oldest child, a girl approximately 9 years old, approached cautiously after Patterson had retreated 20 feet. She picked up 1 Tootsie Roll, examined it carefully, then retreated to the group. The children conferred in whispered Japanese before the girl unwrapped the candy and took a small bite. Patterson reported that the girl's expression transformed from suspicion to wonder in seconds. She immediately shared pieces with the younger children. Within minutes, the entire group had consumed the candy. They did not approach closer, but they did not flee. The following morning, there were 12 children at the fence. This pattern replicated across every American installation in occupied Japan during September 1945. At Atsugi Airfield, Army Air Force personnel reported similar encounters. At Camp Drake in Saitama, infantry units documented identical scenarios. The Civil Affairs Division began compiling reports that revealed an unexpected phenomenon. Captain Donald Fitzgerald, serving with the 27th Infantry Division's Civil Affairs Section, submitted a detailed analysis on September 22, 1945, that attempted to quantify what was occurring. Based on interviews with military police units, quartermaster supply personnel, and line infantry companies, Fitzgerald estimated that American soldiers were distributing between 50,000 and 75,000 pieces of candy daily to Japanese children across the Tokyo-Yokohama area alone. This distribution was entirely unofficial, coming from personal rations rather than organized relief efforts. Soldiers were spending their own money at post exchanges to purchase additional candy specifically for distribution to Japanese children. The Quartermaster Corps reported that candy sales at military exchanges had increased 340% above projected consumption levels during the first month of occupation. The Japanese response evolved rapidly according to Civil Intelligence Section monitoring of civilian attitudes. Reports from Japanese police officials cooperating with occupation authorities indicated that civilian fear was decreasing faster than psychological warfare specialists had predicted possible. The reason cited most frequently in translated civilian interviews was unexpected kindness from American soldiers, particularly toward children. September 15, 1945. 1,430 hours. Sugamo District, Tokyo. Private First Class James Donnelly of the 11th Airborne Division's 188th Parachute Infantry Regiment made a discovery that would fundamentally alter his understanding of the occupation mission. While on patrol through residential areas designated for damage assessment, his squad encountered something unexpected in the mathematics of human misery. 32 children had gathered in what remained of a neighborhood school courtyard. The building itself had been reduced to rubble by incendiary bombing raids in March 1945, but the concrete courtyard remained intact. The children had organized themselves with remarkable discipline, sitting in orderly rows despite having no adult supervision visible. Donnelly's patrol report, filed with battalion headquarters that evening, described children ranging from approximately age 5 to 13. They wore clothing that showed obvious signs of careful maintenance despite severe damage and wear. Several had no shoes. All showed signs of malnutrition according to medical personnel who later reviewed the report. The squad interpreter, Sergeant Roy Yamamoto, a Nisei soldier from California's 442nd Regimental Combat Team temporarily assigned to occupation duty, approached the children and conducted conversations that revealed the situation's complexity. These were war orphans, their parents killed in the firebombing campaigns or died from subsequent starvation and disease. They had organized themselves into a mutual survival group, sharing whatever food they could scavenge. The oldest boy, who Yamamoto estimated at 13 years old, served as the group's leader. He explained through Yamamoto that they gathered each day in the school courtyard because it felt normal, like the world before the war. They had no food that day. They had eaten nothing the previous day. They expected American soldiers might kill them but had nowhere else to go. Donnelly made a decision that had no basis in military regulations or occupation policy. He ordered his entire squad to empty their field ration supplies. Every K ration, every D ration chocolate bar, every piece of hard candy, chewing gum, and cookie from personal stores was pooled and distributed to the children. The battalion report documented what happened with clinical precision. Total rations distributed: 48 K ration units, 32 D ration chocolate bars, approximately 200 pieces of hard candy and chewing gum. The children accepted the food with formal bows and expressions of thanks in Japanese. Not one piece was consumed immediately. Instead, the 13-year-old leader divided everything into precisely equal portions for distribution. Yamamoto reported that the children's leader stated they would make the food last 4 days if they were careful. He asked if the Americans would return. Donnelly promised they would. The following day, Donnelly's squad returned with additional rations purchased from their own pay at the military exchange. They continued daily visits for the next 3 weeks until civilian relief organizations could assume responsibility. This pattern replicated across Tokyo according to Civil Affairs Division compilation reports. By late September 1945, unofficial soldier-initiated feeding programs were operating at 147 documented locations across the Tokyo metropolitan area. The Supreme Commander Allied Powers headquarters faced an unexpected challenge. Soldiers were spending personal funds to feed former enemy civilians, creating ad hoc relief operations that existed outside official channels. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. October 3rd, 1945. 0945 hours. Shibuya Ward, Tokyo. The phenomenon that military analysts were now calling candy diplomacy had evolved beyond individual soldier initiatives into something that challenged conventional occupation doctrine. Major General William Chase, commanding the 1st Cavalry Division, requested guidance from Supreme Commander Allied Powers headquarters on a situation that had no precedent in military government operations. Intelligence reports compiled by the Civil Intelligence Section revealed that Japanese civilian attitudes toward American forces were transforming at rates that contradicted every psychological warfare prediction model. Standard occupation theory, based on Germany and Italy experiences, projected that hostile populations required 12 to 18 months before accepting occupying forces as anything other than oppressors. In Japan, that timeline had collapsed to weeks. The primary catalyst, according to systematic civilian interviews conducted by Japanese police officials cooperating with occupation authorities, was the unexpected kindness American soldiers showed toward children. Translation services working through thousands of civilian testimonies found recurring phrases: "The American soldiers give candy to our children, they smile at our little ones, and they treat our children with gentleness." The statistical analysis prepared by the Civil Affairs Division documented the scale of this unofficial relief effort. By early October 1945, estimated daily candy distribution to Japanese children across all occupied territories exceeded 200,000 pieces. This figure included only documented distributions observed by military police and civil affairs personnel. Actual numbers were certainly higher. Quartermaster Corps supply reports revealed that military post exchanges were ordering candy at levels 400% above authorized consumption rates. The Hershey Chocolate Company received emergency military contracts to increase production specifically for Pacific Theater distribution. The Wrigley Company reported similar requests for chewing gum supplies. Private Eugene Hammond of the 27th Infantry Division kept a detailed personal journal that provides insight into soldier motivations. His entry from October 7, 1945 explained his reasoning with remarkable clarity. "We spent 3 years learning to hate the Japanese. We were told they were subhuman monsters who deserved extermination. Then we got here and found hungry kids who look at us like we're going to kill them. Every chocolate bar I give out feels like I'm proving the propaganda wrong. These are just people. The kids are just kids." This sentiment appeared repeatedly in letters home that passed through military censorship review. The Morale Services Division, which monitored soldier correspondence for security violations and attitude assessment, reported an unexpected pattern. Letters describing interactions with Japanese children appeared in approximately 43% of all surveyed correspondence from occupation forces during September and October 1945. The Japanese government's response was carefully documented in captured cabinet meeting minutes translated by Allied intelligence services. Prime Minister Naruhiko Hideshikune's administration recognized that American treatment of Japanese children was undermining years of militarist propaganda more effectively than any occupation directive could achieve. Interior Ministry reports from October 1945 noted that civilian resistance to occupation had essentially collapsed in areas where American soldiers regularly interacted with children. In contrast, areas with minimal soldier-civilian contact maintained higher levels of fear and hostility. The correlation was unmistakable. General Douglas MacArthur's headquarters issued revised guidance on October 12, 1945. General Order No. 27 officially recognized and endorsed soldier-initiated charitable activities toward Japanese civilians, particularly children. The order authorized use of post-exchange facilities to purchase items for distribution and permitted organized unit-level relief efforts within specified guidelines. October 18, 1945. 1,315 hours. Ueno District, Tokyo. Corporal Daniel Kowalski of the 11th Airborne Division's Service Company encountered a situation that would test the boundaries of official policy and personal conscience. While conducting routine supply transport through residential areas, his convoy stopped at an improvised civilian marketplace that had emerged in the ruins of what had been a commercial district. Approximately 200 Japanese civilians had gathered to trade whatever possessions remained for food. Kowalski's transport manifest indicated his trucks carried supplies destined for military warehouses, including 40 cases of deration chocolate bars and 30 cases of hard candy intended for troop consumption. The scene that confronted Kowalski was documented in his incident report filed with the Provost Marshal that evening. Elderly Japanese civilians were trading family heirlooms, kimonos, and precious photographs for handfuls of rice. Children watched with hollow eyes as parents negotiated for food that would last perhaps 2 days. The desperation was systematic and overwhelming. Kowalski made a decision that violated direct orders regarding military supply security. He ordered his convoy to halt and began distributing chocolate bars and candy directly to children in the marketplace. His report stated that he distributed approximately 960 deration chocolate bars and 720 pieces of hard candy before resuming transport duties. The response was documented by Lieutenant Harrison Webb, who arrived at the scene 30 minutes later investigating reports of unauthorized supply distribution. Webb's report to the Inspector General's office described a crowd of Japanese civilians bowing repeatedly toward the departing convoy, with children clutching chocolate bars and crying. Several elderly civilians approached Webb's jeep to express gratitude in broken English. Webb faced a choice that encapsulated the central tension in occupation policy. Kowalski had clearly violated regulations regarding military property. The distributed supplies were valued at approximately $240, a significant amount in 1945 military accounting. Protocol demanded disciplinary action. But Webb had witnessed the civilian response and understood the strategic implications. Webb's report recommended no disciplinary action, stating that Kowalski's actions had generated more goodwill toward occupation forces than months of official propaganda could achieve. He noted that Japanese civilians at the marketplace were openly discussing American generosity and questioning their government's wartime characterization of Americans as brutal invaders. The incident reached MacArthur's headquarters through routine Inspector General reporting channels. The response, drafted by Brigadier General Courtney Whitney, chief of the government section, established a precedent that would influence occupation policy for years. Whitney's memorandum, dated October 25, 1945, stated that while unauthorized distribution of military supplies could not be officially condoned, commanders were authorized to exercise discretion in cases where soldier actions clearly advanced occupation objectives. Kowalski received no punishment. Instead, his initiative was cited as an example of effective soldier-level diplomacy. The Ueno Marketplace incident was replicated across occupied Japan throughout late October and November 1945. The Civil Affairs Division documented 47 similar cases where soldiers distributed rations to civilian populations without authorization. In 43 cases, commanders declined to pursue disciplinary action, citing positive impact on civilian cooperation. This pattern revealed that occupation policy was being written not in MacArthur's headquarters but on Japanese streets where soldiers made split-second decisions about how to treat former enemies who looked like victims rather than threats. November 5, 1945. 1,620 hours. Kawasaki Industrial District. First Lieutenant Albert Zimmerman, serving as Civil Affairs Officer for the 6th Infantry Division's 20th Regiment, submitted a report that would fundamentally reshape understanding of occupation dynamics. His analysis, based on 8 weeks of systematic observation and civilian interviews, documented what he termed the chocolate phenomenon with scientific precision. Zimmerman had been a sociology professor at the University of Wisconsin before military service. He approached occupation analysis with academic rigor, conducting structured interviews with 234 Japanese civilians across multiple demographic categories. His findings challenged every assumption about occupied populations that military government training had established. The central discovery: Japanese civilians who had received candy or witnessed American soldiers giving candy to children showed measurably different attitudes toward occupation forces compared to those who had not. Zimmerman quantified the difference using a cooperation index he developed, measuring willingness to provide information, compliance with occupation directives, and expressed attitudes toward American personnel. Civilians with direct candy-related contact scored 8.7 on a 10-point cooperation scale. Those without such contact averaged 4.2. The statistical significance was overwhelming. A simple act of giving a child a chocolate bar was producing measurable changes in civilian behavior that sophisticated propaganda campaigns had failed to achieve. Zimmerman's report included detailed case studies. In one Kawasaki neighborhood, an American medical unit had distributed candy to children while conducting public health inspections. Subsequently, civilian cooperation with mandatory tuberculosis screening reached 94%, compared to 23% in nearby areas where no candy distribution had occurred. The mechanism, according to Zimmerman's analysis, was cognitive dissonance resolution. Japanese civilians had been conditioned by years of militarist propaganda to expect Americans to behave as brutal conquerors. The reality of soldiers giving candy to children created psychological dissonance that could only be resolved by rejecting the propaganda narrative entirely. The report documented conversations with Japanese civilians that revealed this transformation. A 47-year-old woman from Kawasaki, identified only as Mrs. Tanaka in the report, explained through an interpreter, "They told us the Americans would murder our children. Instead, they give them sweets and smile. Everything the government told us was a lie. If they lied about the Americans, what else was a lie?" This realization was spreading through Japanese society with remarkable speed. The Home Ministry's own internal reports, captured by Allied intelligence services, documented the propaganda collapse with alarm. A November 3 report from the Interior Ministry noted that civilian faith in government information had suffered catastrophic deterioration directly attributable to the contrast between predicted American behavior and observed American behavior. Zimmerman's report concluded with a recommendation that would influence occupation policies significantly. He proposed that organized candy distribution programs be formally established as civil affairs operations, with dedicated supply chains and trained personnel. The cost would be minimal compared to military government operations. The return in civilian cooperation would be substantial. MacArthur's headquarters received Zimmerman's report on November 12, 1945. Within 2 weeks, the Civil Affairs Division had drafted implementation guidelines for systematic candy distribution programs across all occupied territories. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. November 28, 1945. 1040 hours. Osaka Prefecture. The formalization of candy distribution programs marked a transformation from spontaneous soldier kindness to systematic occupation policy. Captain Richard Holloway, appointed as coordinator for the newly established Civilian Morale Enhancement Program under the Civil Affairs Division, began implementing what military historians would later recognize as one of the most successful psychological operations in modern warfare. The program's structure, outlined in Civil Affairs Directive No. 43 dated November 20, 1945, established systematic candy distribution as an official occupation activity. Each infantry division received monthly allocations specifically designated for civilian distribution, separate from troop rations. The quantities were substantial. The 1st Cavalry Division alone received authorization for 50,000 chocolate bars and 75,000 pieces of hard candy monthly for civilian distribution purposes. Holloway's implementation guidelines, distributed to all division civil affairs officers, specified procedures that balanced military efficiency with cultural sensitivity. Distribution would occur at designated locations and times to prevent civilian disorder. Soldiers would be trained in basic Japanese courtesy phrases. Children would receive priority, but elderly civilians would not be excluded. All distributions would be conducted with dignity and respect. The program expanded beyond simple candy distribution into organized recreational activities. At Osaka's Tennoji district, Lieutenant Jennifer Morrison of the Army Nurse Corps established what she termed friendship circles, where American medical personnel and Japanese children gathered weekly. Morrison's after-action reports documented sessions where nurses distributed candy, provided basic medical screening, and taught simple English phrases while learning Japanese in return. The response was documented in Civil Intelligence Section reports with measurable precision. In areas with active candy distribution programs, civilian cooperation with occupation directives averaged 89%. Crime rates in these areas were 67% lower than in locations without organized programs. Reports of civilian hostility toward American personnel essentially disappeared. Japanese educators began approaching American civil affairs officers with requests that revealed the program's expanding influence. School principals in Osaka, Kyoto, and Kobe requested permission to invite American soldiers to visit classrooms. The requests, carefully documented in Civil Affairs Division files, explain that children wanted to meet the kind soldiers who share their sweets. These visits created powerful propaganda effects that far exceeded their modest cost. Private Thomas Richardson of the 25th Infantry Division described a school visit in his November 30th letter home, which passed through military censorship review. He wrote of Japanese children who had been taught to fear Americans, now laughing and playing games while sharing chocolate bars. "They're just kids," Richardson wrote. "They want the same things kids everywhere want. They want to feel safe and have enough to eat and play games. The war makes no sense when you see their faces." The Japanese press, operating under occupation censorship but with surprising editorial freedom, began publishing stories about American soldier kindness. The Asahi Shimbun, Japan's largest newspaper, ran a series of articles in late November 1945 documenting candy distributions across Tokyo. The headline from November 27 read, "American soldiers bring sweetness to bitter days." The article described soldiers spending their own money to purchase candy for Japanese orphans. These stories circulated throughout occupied Japan, creating a narrative counter to years of militarist propaganda. The government section's media monitoring unit documented that positive stories about American soldiers appeared in Japanese newspapers with increasing frequency throughout November and December 1945. By month's end, such stories averaged 4 to 5 articles daily across major publications. The strategic implications were analyzed in a comprehensive assessment prepared by Brigadier General Kenneth Kramer, Deputy Chief of Civil Affairs Division. His report, submitted to MacArthur's headquarters on December 3, 1945, stated that candy distribution programs had achieved civilian cooperation levels that conventional military government operations typically required 12 to 18 months to accomplish. The cost was negligible. The return was transformative. December 15, 1945. 1,520 hours. Tokyo Imperial Palace Outer Gardens. The culmination of the candy diplomacy phenomenon occurred during an event that would have been unthinkable 4 months earlier. General Douglas MacArthur authorized a Christmas celebration for Japanese orphans to be held at Hibiya Park, adjacent to the Imperial Palace grounds. The symbolism was deliberate and profound. The event planning, coordinated by Major Caroline Bradford of the Civil Affairs Division, involved unprecedented cooperation between American occupation forces and Japanese civilian authorities. Bradford's planning documents, preserved in National Archives records, show meticulous attention to cultural sensitivity while maintaining the event's core purpose, demonstrating American goodwill toward Japanese children. American units across the Tokyo area contributed resources. The 1st Cavalry Division provided transportation. The 11th Airborne Division supplied tents and equipment. Army Quartermaster units allocated 10,000 chocolate bars, 15,000 pieces of hard candy, 5,000 sticks of chewing gum, and 3,000 cookies. The American Red Cross contributed warm clothing items. Military chaplains organized donations of toys purchased by soldiers from their personal funds. The Japanese response revealed how dramatically civilian attitudes had transformed. Tokyo municipal authorities actively assisted with event organization. Japanese police directed traffic and maintained order. Local newspapers published announcements encouraging orphanages to bring children to the celebration. The cooperation was voluntary and enthusiastic. December 24, 1945. 1,000 hours. Approximately 4,200 Japanese children gathered in Hibiya Park under clear winter skies. Military police reports documented the event with precision. Children arrived in organized groups from 73 orphanages and children's shelters across the Tokyo metropolitan area. Ages range from 3 to 14 years. Many wore shoes for the first time in months, donated by American personnel. The event proceeded with remarkable order. American soldiers, many who had fought Japanese forces months earlier, distributed candy and gifts to children who had been taught to fear them. Army photographers captured images that would be distributed worldwide, Japanese children smiling while American soldiers placed chocolate bars in their hands, orphans clutching teddy bears donated by soldiers, elderly Japanese caregivers bowing in gratitude toward young American privates. Chaplain Captain Harold Jensen delivered remarks translated into Japanese by interpreters. His words, recorded in Civil Affairs Division reports, emphasized themes of peace, reconciliation, and hope for the future. He spoke of children as symbols of new beginning, innocent of the hatreds that had caused such suffering. The Japanese caregivers listened with visible emotion. The distribution was conducted with dignity that honored Japanese cultural expectations. Children bowed politely when receiving gifts. American soldiers returned the bows, having been trained in this basic courtesy. The mutual respect was genuine and observed by hundreds of Japanese civilians who gathered at the park's perimeter to witness the unprecedented scene. Civil Intelligence Section observers documented civilian reactions through systematic monitoring. Conversations among watching civilians, translated by Japanese linguists, revealed profound psychological impact. One elderly man was recorded stating, "These Americans treat our orphans with more kindness than our own government showed them. We were told they were demons. They are human beings with generous hearts." The event concluded at 1,600 hours. Children departed with bags containing candy, cookies, and small toys. Many clutched chocolate bars carefully, planning to make them last. American soldiers, according to multiple after-action reports, were visibly affected by the experience. Chaplain Jensen's report noted that dozens of soldiers requested permission to visit orphanages regularly to continue supporting the children. The strategic assessment prepared by the government section acknowledged that the Hibiya Park event had accomplished more to legitimize the occupation than any military directive or propaganda campaign. Photographs from the event appeared in Japanese newspapers on December 25 and 26. The Mainichi Shimbun headline read, "American soldiers bring Christmas joy to war orphans." The accompanying photographs showed smiling children and generous soldiers, an image that contradicted every wartime propaganda message about American brutality. January 20, 1946. 5 months after surrender. The transformation of Japan from enemy nation to cooperative occupied territory was analyzed in comprehensive assessments prepared for the Joint Chiefs of Staff by Occupation Headquarters. The conclusions challenged fundamental assumptions about military government and the nature of post-war reconstruction. The Civil Affairs Division's final report on candy distribution programs, submitted January 15, 1946, documented results that exceeded every projection. Total candy and confectionery items distributed to Japanese civilians between September 1945 and January 1946, approximately 12.5 million pieces. Estimated cost to U.S. government and individual soldiers, $287,000. Return on investment in terms of civilian cooperation and reduced occupation resistance, incalculable. The statistical analysis was compelling. Areas with active candy distribution programs showed civilian cooperation rates averaging 91%, compared to 54% in areas without such programs. Crime rates in program areas were 73% lower. Incidents of civilian hostility toward American personnel were 89% lower. The correlation between simple acts of kindness and measurable cooperation was undeniable. But the true impact extended beyond statistics into human transformation documented in thousands of personal accounts. Private Robert Hartley, who had carried those first 32 Hershey bars into Yokohama in August, wrote in his final letter before rotation home, "I came to Japan expecting to hate these people forever. I'm leaving having learned that kindness is more powerful than any weapon. The children taught me that. When you give a kid a chocolate bar and see his face light up, you remember that we're all human. War makes us forget that. Peace lets us remember." Japanese perspectives, collected through systematic civil intelligence section interviews, revealed parallel transformation. Mrs. Fumiko Yamamoto, interviewed in December 1945, stated through interpreters, "I lost my husband and 2 sons in the war. I believed I would hate Americans until my death. Then American soldiers gave candy to my grandson and treated him with gentleness. My hatred could not survive their kindness. They showed me that individual human beings can be good even when nations are at war." The phenomenon influenced planning for post-war reconstruction globally. The candy distribution model was studied by occupation planners preparing for potential conflicts in other regions. The fundamental lesson, documented in War Department strategic assessments, was that small acts of individual kindness could accomplish strategic objectives that military force alone could never achieve. General Douglas MacArthur, in his final report on the occupation's first year, devoted significant attention to the candy phenomenon. He wrote, "The American soldiers' instinctive generosity toward children, demonstrated through the simple act of sharing candy, accomplished more to reconcile former enemies than calculated policy could have achieved. It demonstrated that in the human heart, kindness overcomes hatred, that individual compassion can bridge the deepest national divides." The legacy extended through generations. Japanese who received candy as children in 1945 and 1946 became leaders of post-war Japan's dramatic recovery. Many credited their positive attitudes toward America to those early encounters with soldiers who shared chocolate bars. The alliance between the United States and Japan, one of the strongest international partnerships of the late 20th century, had roots in simple acts of kindness during those first months of occupation. Today, in museums across Japan, exhibits documenting the occupation period often feature photographs of American soldiers distributing candy to Japanese children. These images represent a truth that transcends military history, that in humanity's darkest moments, individual acts of compassion can light paths toward reconciliation that seemed impossible. The streams of chocolate bars flowing into children's hands in autumn 1945 didn't just satisfy immediate hunger. They demonstrated that even after total war, even between the most bitter enemies, the human capacity for kindness could overcome the deepest hatreds. They proved that the best weapon for building peace is not the sword, but the open hand offering sweetness to a child. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.